Factorio, a game of belts, bugs, and automation. A game where you read the reviews on Steam and realize that this actually might be a dangerous game to play in reality. This is a game I used to spend a lot of time on years ago and recently got back into playing. And with this newfound Factorio enjoyment, I decided that I wanted to survive 100 days in Factorio without dying. My first attempt at surviving 100 days in Factorio was going relatively well until the bugs started breaching my base. Naturally, I had to try to clear out some of their homes, but during one of these offensive missions, on day 52, my one and only life came to a bitter and unceremonious end. But I am nothing if not stubborn, so here goes attempt number 2 at surviving 100 days in Factorio. Day 1 started as all Factorio playthroughs do. Crash landing on a world, taking a look around to see what my newfound property has in terms of resources, mining some rocks, crafting some smelters, hand mining some ore, and working through the night to begin to set up the first automatic smelting array. Day 2 was mainly spent finishing up this automatic iron smelting array. Iron is the most important resource in the game, especially in early game, so I wanted a decent supply of it. And after a full day of constructing and placing belts, miners, and inserters, I had a fully functioning and fully automatic iron smelting array. Day 3 was mainly spent automating another important early game resource, copper. Similar to iron, I set up a nice array of belts, smelters, miners, and inserters, which was set up by the end of the day. However, it was going to take a little bit of time for the input coal to be able to fully power it. During the night, I also took the time to begin crafting all of the components needed for a power plant. Day 4 began with the construction of the power plant, followed by some deforestation, fueling that power plant with some electric miners, and jump-starting the power plant with some coal to get our first power plant fully automated and self-reliant. Day 5 was mainly a day of deforestation and beginning stone production, or at least the mining of it. Day 5 also saw the placement of some electric miners on the iron nodes, and kind of generally starting to plan out for the main iron smelting array. Day 6 saw the construction of the first laboratory, along with a decent amount of red science, so that I could research some of the basic technologies that I would need. Also on Day 6 was the design and construction of the majority of the first major iron smelting plant in this playthrough. On Day 7, the construction of the major iron smelting plant continued, and while there was a long queue of inserters to craft in my inventory, I decided that I wanted to explore around a bit. I wanted to get a general idea of where the neighbors were, and I thought I found the closest nest down south of my base. I then returned home and continued construction throughout the night. Day 8 started by tearing down the old, temporary iron factory in order to make room for more electric miners. After everything had been connected up and a coal line set up to feed the smelters, I finally had my first full yellow belt of iron plates being produced. The morning of Day 9, I began assembling the second major iron smelting array, and then decided to put together an ammo factory as I knew I would need a lot of ammunition. However, I wasn't expecting soon to be that soon, because that very evening I got my first visit from the locals, and they were not happy. After dealing with them the American way, I realized that there was actually a nest up north that I overlooked while scouting the area. This meant that I would need to get some defenses up relatively soon. Day 10, I crafted and placed down some defensive turrets, and then went to piss off the bugs just so I could watch the turret tear them down in satisfaction. I also knew that this nest was a little too close to my base for comfort, so I wanted to clear it out. So I crafted what I would need for this, went up north, and after an admittedly rusty offensive which almost killed me, I managed to clear out the nest and then do a little more exploring to see if there was anything else I was missing up north. Then I decided to go home and repair all the damage done to my base. Day 11 began by starting to automate wall production. Given that the entire objective of this challenge is to survive 100 days, I would rather have my base be way overprotected than underprotected. After finishing up the wall factory, I decided it was time to continue working on the second iron smelting array. Day 12 was almost entirely dedicated to finishing the second iron smelting array. It took a little bit longer than I thought it would due to crafting issues, but by the end of the day I had 2 full yellow belts of iron plates. I began day 13 by working on the construction of the first major copper smelting plant, as I was going to need at least a full yellow belt of that. Later in the day I decided it was time to start placing some of those walls that had been producing all this time, and managed to get the majority of the outline of my base covered in walls. This way, if the neighbors were to attack from any direction, I would get notified and I would have a little bit of time to get down there and place a turret before they broke through the walls. Very simply put, day 14 was spent finishing up the wall on the northern side and expanding the power plant as it was getting near capacity with everything up and running. Day 15 saw the copper plant be nearly fully completed. However, I didn't want to turn on the copper plant quite yet, as looking at my map revealed that the pollution was right on the edge of a few of the neighbors' homes, and I wasn't fully ready to piss them off just yet. The majority of day 16 was spent building a turret factory. I wanted turrets pretty much lining all the walls, so I would need one of these eventually anyways. Once it was fully set up and the only missing ingredient was the copper, I finally turned on the copper production. Day 17 was spent reinforcing the perimeter. First by adding an extra layer to the entire wall, making it 2 thick instead of 1, and then connecting the ammo factory to a belt that ran around the entire perimeter of my base. That way, anywhere I placed a turret along the wall would be able to have access to ammo. I would like to say that day 18 was productive, but pretty much the entire day was spent experimenting with different wall designs that looked cool and might have helped out a bit. I don't really know, but mainly I was just waiting for turrets to be produced. Day 19 I started placing some turrets along the northern wall, and as I was doing this, ironically, there was an attack. I panicked a little, but thankfully there were enough turrets there to handle the problem. Later in the day there was also an attack to the south, so I hustled on down there, and thankfully there are already some turrets there that I just had to fill with ammo to deal with that problem. So I finished the day by making sure that that corner was well defended and the ammo reloading was fully automated. Day 20 I placed some more turrets along the southern wall, and then ran power along the entire wall. This was so I didn't run into the problem of having no power at a point where I needed inserters to feed turrets. The rest of the day was spent sitting around doing nothing productive at all. Day 21, I fortified different areas of the wall with even more turrets, and then as I was crafting 30 labs, which took quite a while to craft I might add, I continued to work on my stupid wall designs that I probably would never use. The morning of day 22, I continued working on my really dumb wall designs, and I know some of you guys are thinking that I'm putting way too much thought into this defense, that I only need a few turrets every once in a while, and yeah, you're right. But again, the only objective of this challenge is to not die, so I am not gonna risk the aliens breaking through somewhere and I'm not dying because I didn't put up enough defenses. With that being said, I finally had enough turrets that the entire wall could now be covered in turrets with no spaces, and I finally felt a little safer. Day 23, I placed down the laboratories in my designated research area that I just made, and then put together a factory to automate red science, which was almost completed by the end of the day. During day 24, I finished and turned on red science production, which allowed me to start researching everything red science. I then handcrafted a ton of inserters and placed them at every turret that did not already have an inserter, so that I wouldn't have to think about defense for a while. Day 25, I extended my mini main bus and began working on a green science factory. And reflecting that I'm now a quarter of the way through this, I realized that yeah, I may not have been the most efficient, and there are probably people who are judging me, but you know what? I am safe and I am proud. Day 26, I continue work on my green science factory, and yeah, that's all I really did today. By the end of the day, it was just over half completed. Day 27, I spend the day finishing up the green science packs, and by the end of the day, I have everything I need for green science, so I turn the factory on, and green science begins being produced. The start of day 28, I commence my researching of technologies that require both red and green science. I then spend the rest of the day making a little factory underneath the green science factory that will produce fast inserters, as I will be needing a lot of those. Day 29, the inner colonist in me comes out, and I start scouting the land around my base for resource nodes. I head up to a massive iron node a little outside my base and begin making plans for how best to harvest this resource. As day 30 rolls around, I extend my mini main bus just a little bit longer and begin designing another factory, with this one's purpose being to manufacture all of the red belts, red splitters, and red underground belts. These will be important as I'm not really planning on using trains this playthrough, as you know, I don't want to die, which means that I will be needing quite a few of these red belts along the way. During the morning of day 31, I finish up the basic red belt production. However, the splitters and the underground belts are actually quite a bit more complicated, so I spend the rest of the day designing the factory so that I will have all of the parts needed to fully automate those. This all leads to the factory being completed about halfway through day 32. I then extend the main bus just a little bit longer as I have one more factory to make. The blue inserter factory that I previously made was causing quite a few issues, which meant I had to stop the blue inserter production and create a new factory for blue inserters down here next to the red belt factory. This is the project I spend most of day 33 making, just a simple blue inserter factory. And as night falls, this factory becomes fully operational. Day 34, I decide to extend the borders of my factory. I capture a quite large piece of land down to the bottom left, no resources in it, just land, and I'll be honest, in hindsight this was a giant waste of time, but that's what I spent day 34 doing. Carrying on with this giant waste of time, on day 35, I tear down the old wall that I really don't need anymore and fortify the new wall, which I still do need. And yes, again, it's a bit overkill, but I'd rather be safe than sorry in a one life playthrough. The morning of day 36, I finish up the wall defenses, and after watching the footage back on this quite a few times, I still don't know what I was doing the rest of day 36. Maybe I was scheming or something, but yeah, that's about all. The morning of day 37, I create a small steel factory just so I can have a little bit of steel for certain items I need to craft. I sit there and I contemplate some more. Once night falls, I begin making another land grab push, extending a wall up north in hopes to encircle both an iron node and some oil. Day 38 is mostly spent extending this wall, using as many cliffs as possible because those are naturally impregnable. A decent amount of deforestation is also done on this day as this wall runs straight through a heavily wooded area. So my bad, Mother Nature. The morning of day 39 is spent clearing out a neighbor's home that was just a little bit too close to my wall for comfort. I then decide to handcraft just a little bit of military science because I'm going to need some in order to get my hands on more efficient deforestation tools. Day 40 starts with me going back to clear a path through the woods for the rest of my wall to fit. Whoa. I've been so focused on the factory that I forgot to run my intro. My shitty intro that I've run on every video. Alright, let's do it now, whatever. You're sitting through it. But yeah, I spend the rest of day 40 clearing the remaining path through the trees and finishing up the wall, as well as starting to place some turrets behind it. Day 41 is subsequently spent running the ammo belt along the entire wall, making sure all the turrets had access to it, and then running power along the entire wall so that all the inserters could, feed the turrets. Day 42 was first spent getting enough gray science to finish up the flamethrower research, and the rest of the day was spent placing an inserter at every turret along the wall. This led to another useless day in day 43, where I played around with oil for a bit and then tore down some walls that were no longer needed. Day 44 was first spent getting stone bricks and throwing them in a chest, as I was going to be needing a lot of stone bricks for steel furnaces, and then automating a little bit of flamethrower fuel for what was probably going to be a terrible idea. The start of day 45 is placing miners over the giant iron field we now have in our territory. The goal is to get 2 full red belts of iron plates out of this iron node, one of which will be turned into steel and the other will stay as iron. Day 46, the first smelting array is constructed, followed by enough miners being put on the coal nodes to power all the smelting arrays that will be up north. The morning of day 47 is then spent placing the remaining miners over the exposed iron node, so that I would have 2 full belts of iron to smelt. However, when I go to construct the second smelting plant, there are too many trees in the way, so I get a brilliant idea. Day 48, I cut a little bit of a line through the trees to prevent an absolute catastrophe, and then I burn that shit down. And yes, while there were some burnt stumps remaining after the fire had stopped, it was worth it both in efficiency's sake and because it felt pretty damn good. With the cleared out land, I then constructed the second smelting array. I started the morning of day 49 off right by burning down some more innocent wildlife. However, this time the fire did cause quite a bit of damage actually to my main wall. So after making those repairs, I ran a coal line from the coal node up to the new smelting plant. Day 50 began by hooking up the coal line to the first smelting plant, as well as the second smelting plant, which was then subsequently finally finished up. The rest of the day was spent constructing a third smelting plant, right next to the first smelting plant, which will be responsible for turning the iron plates and such into steel. Day 51, the construction of the steel smelting plant continues. There are a few redesigns, moving lines around here and there, but by the time night falls, the plant is fully operational, giving me a 1/5 full red belt of steel, along with a full red belt of iron plates. Day 52, I want to start putting my newfound resources to work, in particular, starting to develop military science. So I clear out a bit of space, watch quite a large attack on my base that gets defended well, but motivates me that I need military science sooner rather than later, and spend the rest of the day just kind of working out what I'm gonna need to produce enough military science. The morning of day 53, I make a small factory for the first ingredient needed for military science, grenades. After finishing up the grenade factory, I realized I needed to run a line of copper down from the main base up to where I'm producing the military science. So the rest of the day is spent trying to maneuver that line of copper through the main base. Day 54 starts by trying to troubleshoot some problems with getting the copper line up to the military science factory. But then I realized that walls are one of the ingredients needed for military science, and I already have a wall factory in my main base. So I combine the copper and wall line and spend the rest of the day running that specific line up to the military science factory. Day 55 was spent building a factory for the final part needed for military science, piercing rounds magazine. By the end of the day, the factory has been completed and I now have all the parts I need to make military science. Day 56 begins with a turret on the northern side of my base being destroyed, so I went up there to make some repairs, and then the military science factory being constructed and completed. With military science now being produced, the only thing left to do is run that military science down to the labs, so I spend the rest of day 56 doing that. The morning of day 57 saw military science finally reaching the labs, allowing research to begin on new technologies. I wanted to clear out some space for other factories that would be going near the military science factory, so I spent the rest of the day really just living my dream and completely wiping out a forest with a surplus of grenades. And yes, I almost did die doing this, but nothing warms a Factorio player's heart quite like killing Mother Nature in an efficient manner. Day 58 begins by repairing all the damage done to the factory by the grenades during my spree, as well as taking a moment to truly admire the amount of nature I had just eviscerated. The rest of the day was spent repairing all the damage done to the exterior of the wall by the bugs. Day 59, it's time for me to start planning to get blue science into my base. Blue science will allow me to unlock a lot of the endgame technologies and just really important technologies for survival, so it is an absolute priority. Unfortunately, blue science requires oil production, and oil production sucks. So I spend the rest of day 59 figuring out how many oil products I can get from the 3 individual oil nodes currently inside my base. Day 60 begins by running a water line from the nearest lake all the way up to my oil production. Water is needed to create sulfur, which is one of the 2 oil products I will be needing in order to make blue science. By the end of the day, I have a nice little sulfur factory made that should fulfill all my blue science needs. This means that day 61 is spent building a factory for the other major oil product I will be needing, plastic. And as oil does suck, it takes pretty much the rest of the day, but by the end of the day I have a line of plastic and a line of sulfur, which should be sufficient to power my blue science factory. Day 62, I realize that I'm going to be needing a lot more copper, so instead of going out and finding a new copper node, I spend the day retrofitting my current copper smelting plant so that it will be producing one full red belt of copper instead of a yellow belt. Day 63, I add the additional copper miners required to turn out a full red belt of copper plates, and then spend the rest of the day kind of deciding how and where I want to manufacture blue science. Day 64 was spent working entirely on the advanced circuit factory. Advanced circuits are very tedious to make but required for blue science, so it was something that had to be done. By the end of the day, I would say about half of the factory was completed. Unsurprisingly, day 65 was entirely spent finishing the advanced circuit factory, which I did. By the end of the day, the factory was good to go. Day 66 was a bit of a boring day. I spent the morning staring at my factory trying to figure out where I wanted to put everything, and spent the rest of the day fixing up a problem down at the power plant as it was running out of coal, so I just needed to clear some space on the coal node so that I could get more coal to the power plant, as, power is pretty important. Day 67, I began working on the factory for the final part I would need for blue science, engine units. Engine units require a lot of steel and iron, which, thankfully, I had. However, the crafting time on engine units is quite a long time, so this was going to need to be a pretty big factory, which is why I spent the rest of the day getting this factory at least started. Day 68 is spent automating pipes and gears, which are both required for the engine units, and once those are connected up to the engine unit factory, all that's left to do at the end of the day is connect the steel up and engine units will be produced. The morning of day 69 sees steel being connected up to the factory, allowing engine units to finally begin production. With all the required parts for blue science present, I find a nice spot and begin constructing the blue science factory, which takes me the rest of the day. Day 70 is the big day. Everything is hooked up in the morning to the blue science factory, allowing blue science to finally start being produced. The blue science is then run down and connected with the military science line, which will lead it directly to the laboratories. With blue science now hooked up, it opens up a lot of doors for researching technologies that are essential for the survival and the expansion of the factory. Day 71 was a pretty chill day that was spent tearing down a wall that was no longer needed. It was just annoying me, and I probably could have had robots do it later on, but I just felt like doing something mindless today. The morning of day 72 was also spent finishing tearing down this wall, with the remainder of the day evaluating all my factories, how they're performing, and deciding what resources I really need to go after sooner rather than later. Day 73, I'd really like to make something up and pretend that I was doing something productive on this day, but I can't find much. At the end of the day, I did fix a problem with the coal not reaching the top smelters, as the grenades were hogging it all, but besides fixing that, I can find nothing I did today. Day 74 was mainly spent securing a new resource node. I was low on power and coal in general, so I decided I was going to capture a coal node just outside my base. While normally this might be a job for trains, and usually would be a job for trains, I didn't really want to use trains until at least 100 days because I didn't want to accidentally die, and I was going to need a ton of free space for solar panels, which was the power method I was planning on using for late game stuff. So yeah, day 74 was spent clearing trees and constructing a defensive wall. Day 75, I spent the entire day and night finishing up the new defensive wall. That's it. Day 76 was spent adding some finishing touches to the defensive wall, and then constructing another steam power plant that would give me enough power until I at least automate solar panels. Day 77, I finished up the second steam power plant and spent most of the night having quite a lot of fun with grenades and deforestation. Day 78, I decide it's finally time for me to start crafting explosives. Both for cliff explosives, so I can flatten out my land because the cliffs were getting a bit annoying, as well as explosives that will be used for weapons with the purpose of depopulating the area. So I put as many electric miners on that recently captured coal node as I can, and then run that coal line up to an area that I designated for my explosives factory. Day 79, I grabbed some sulfur from the blue science production that I will be needing for explosives, as well as run a water lineup, because water is apparently another ingredient that makes things go boom. Day 80 rolls around as I set up 4 chemical plants in order to craft all the explosives that I will need, and then spend the rest of the day bringing over parts from other sections of the factory that will be needed for very specific types of explosives. During the morning of day 81, cliff explosives were automated, and then of course cliff explosives had to be tested, as getting rid of cliffs is quite satisfying. The rest of the day and night was spent running a plastic line over to the new factory, and then automating explosive cannon shells, as I would be needing quite a few of those. Day 82 consisted of going down to repair some damage on the southern wall, going on a bit of a cliff destroying spree, and then finally getting all of the materials needed to craft a tank. The morning of day 83, it is finally time for me to go on the offensive. And some of you might be thinking that this is unfair, the bugs are just defending their territory, I'm the one who came in and took all their natural resources and polluted the environment, but they're the bad guy because I say they're the bad guy. With that being said, I spend the day completely justifiably bombing all of their homes. And to be honest, it felt great. Day 84, I return home to get some more ammunition, fuel, and everything that I will be needing in order to efficiently remove the locals, and then spend the rest of the day carrying out this goal. Day 85, I continue on with my massacre, which by the end of the day was nearly completed. I had successfully removed all enemy bases within my pollution sphere to the north, east, and south. At the end of the day, I returned home to restock and get ready for the final push to the west. So, day 86, I grab the good old tank and head out to finish what I started. And after a long, brutal, and bloody day, I had successfully removed all enemy bases within my pollution sphere. Day 87 rolls around and I realize that I'm going to be needing a lot more copper and oil. Thankfully, there is quite a large patch of copper and oil up north, though I need to figure out how best to harvest it. While I'm contemplating this decision, I spend the rest of the day tearing down a wall I no longer need. During the morning of day 88, I clear out a few of the bugs' homes that are up by the copper and oil nodes that I wish to capture, and then make the decision that yes, while it would be easier to just have an outpost and use a train, I don't really want to use trains, and I'm gonna need a lot more open area if I want to use solar panels, so I decide I'm just going to wall the entire area into the main base. So I spend the rest of day 88 beginning the new perimeter. Day 89 sees me run the ammo belt along the wall of the new perimeter, which is quite long, I might add, and then adding a few machine guns here and there, and finally running power along the entire wall. Day 90 was mostly spent placing inserters at every gun turret along the wall, ensuring that they are armed and ready to kill. The rest of the day was spent placing an extra layer to the walls where it was not already double thick. Day 91 mainly sees me remove a wall that I no longer need, followed shortly thereafter by me putting up the final wall I do need to fully close off my base. Day 92 was pretty much entirely spent collecting all the materials for and crafting pump jacks and miners for all my newly acquired oil and copper nodes. Day 93 started with some deforestation, followed by some cliff flattening. This was followed up by the setup of some pump jacks and miners. On day 94, I finished placing enough miners to fill up one full red belt of copper. I then ran the red belt of copper down to a more central area of the factory near the coal, as this was the area I was planning on building most of my smelters in the future. I then spent the rest of the evening building a new copper smelting plant. The morning of day 95, I finished and turned on the new copper smelting plant, and then I decided for the rest of the day that I didn't really care about this forest anymore, so I was gonna get rid of it. I spent most of day 96 messing around with oil products and such, figuring out how many pump jacks would be hooked up to each pipe to produce the required heavy, light, and petroleum products I was looking to get, and actually starting construction on a refinery plant near the end of the day. Day 97 was just a continuation of day 96, which I actually guess you could say about every day. working on the oil refinery plant and mainly just breaking up the fluids into their own lines and figuring out where I want to put their respective processing factories. Day 98 was mostly spent working with the light oil products. Heavy oil and petroleum gas are both very essential to early and mid-game stuff in Factorio. However, a byproduct of making this is light oil. This light oil needs to be transformed into something useful or it will clog up the system. So I chose to transform it into petroleum gas. During the night, I also set up a very simple factory that would turn heavy oil products into lubricant. I spent most of day 99 pumping petroleum gas and lubricant down towards the main area in the factory where I'm planning on building a ton of robots. That brings us to day 100. I'd like to say I did some big finale, but the factory must grow. With that being said, I took the petroleum gas that I just ran down and started manufacturing a ton of plastic with it, as plastic was going to be absolutely essential if I wanted to end up getting an army of robots helping me build my factory. But with that sunrise, I have now successfully played 100 days in Factorio without dying. I actually ended up playing a lot more than that because I didn't realize I'd already gone over 100 days and I was so into building the factory. But you know what? Challenge completed. If you do want to see me go 200 days, be sure to drop a comment down below and like the video. Also feel free to comment about how inefficient my factory is, as I'm sure some of you watching me build got a little annoyed. But other than that, it's been your boy Bandit Banks, and I'd like to do a full outro, but I got a factory to build. So thank you for stopping by, and see ya.